Well, welcome to our series called Loaded. This video series is based on a preaching series I did a couple of years ago. And if you're jumping in the deep end of this series, this 5-part series, a huge well done. I'd like to encourage you also to take notes. Research has shown that we remember far better when we are writing than when we are just listening. And I'm guessing that if you're taking the time to watch this and to discuss it, that you also want to learn and grow from it. So a huge high five to you for doing that. If we've never met face to face before, my name is Steve. I'm married to Jax. We've got 3 amazing children. And at the time of recording this, I am part of the team at CityHill Church. Together with my wife Jax, we lead the team here at CityHill. And a tremendous privilege to be talking around this really important, sometimes tricky subject of finances. A friend of mine used to lead a church in Durban. And they used to do baptisms down in the ocean. Very warm water there, of course. And he noticed that when people were going to get baptized, they would put their towel down on the sand, and then they'd put their cell phone, their watch, and their keys down on their towel. They'd go and get baptized, and then they'd dry themselves and obviously put their watch back on, cell phone in the pocket, and take their car keys again. And he made this a very humorous observation. He said, many times when people come to Christ, he says, they say to God, you can have all of me, except my watch, my wallet, and my keys, except my time, except my money, and except my possessions. Anything else you can have, but not those 3 things. And although he said it in a humorous fashion, I think there's a lot of truth to that. Is we're very happy for God to kind of impact our lives in various ways, but when it comes to those subjects, time, money, and possessions, we're a little bit nervous of what God might have to say. And thankfully, it's not bad news, it's great news. God is there, God loves us. And He's blessed us, and so we're going to look at some principles that God's given us in His Word. What's interesting to me is that Jesus, when He walked on the earth, spoke more about money than the topics of prayer, heaven and hell, all combined. I wonder why He did that. Well, maybe it was because He knew that money would hold such a unique place in our hearts, because money represents our time, and with money we can buy things to live, but also to make us feel good. Money it's a very emotional thing. It's connected to actually a deep part of our hearts. It's interesting, it's still talking about Jesus, that of the 38 parables He told, 16 of them spoke about handling money and handling possessions. Clearly, Jesus is interested in helping us figure out how to have a better relationship with money. So in this first session, I'm going to talk about having a good relationship with money, or changing our relationship with money. We could talk about our relationship with God, with our spouse, with our children, but what about your relationship and my relationship with money? The way I've structured this talk is like this. I'd like to ask 3 questions and share a couple of verses, and then we'll land. My first question is this: what kind of animal best describes your relationship with money? So if you're taking notes, you might like to write that down. What kind of animal best describes your relationship with money? I've got 3 examples to start off with. The first example would be a caged lion. Maybe your relationship with money is like a caged lion. A caged lion paces up and down in his cage every single day. I'm guessing that a caged lion feels constant low-level frustration. Certainly the caged lion relationship with money. So every day you're pacing up and down, you've got this low-level frustration about money. When anybody talks about money, about taxes, about the government, there's always slight danger around you because you feel frustrated. You've got this deep internal frustration. You feel like you deserve better. You're unhappy with the deal you've got in life. You live by comparison to, in your mind, who are the free lions, ranging out in the hills, able to do whatever they want, and you are caged because of money. And you compare how much you currently have to how much you think you should have, and the difference between those 2 equals frustration. So picture one caged lion. Does that in any way represent your relationship with money or mine? The second example would be the spitting cobra. Now, the spitting cobra relationship with money is like this. Spitting cobra lies mostly still. It doesn't have much movement, but every now and then, I'm talking about a real-life spitting cobra, it will suddenly rear up and strike. And so maybe you're not like the caged lion. You don't feel frustrated every single day. You just carry on with your life. But every now and then, possibly at the end of each month when it comes to making payments, the spitting cobra goes from its very restful, peaceful state, suddenly rears up and spits out venom internally around the state of affairs when you look at your budget. Possibly, if you're married, your spouse comes to learn to walk a wide berth around you at those moments because they don't want to get bitten. They don't want venom. In other words, you've got a love-hate relationship with money. For the majority of the month, all good, happy, but boy, for a few days, just and the spitting cobra spits venom. You might view money as a necessary evil. That's a spitting cobra kind of view of money. The third animal picture that might represent you is that of an ostrich. Now, I'm told an ostrich doesn't actually stick its head in the sand to hide from danger, but it just puts its head down low on the ground. But that's been the kind of, if I could say, the caricature of an ostrich, is that it sticks its head in the sand when danger approaches. And maybe your approach with money is like an ostrich. So you just stick your head in the sand and hope that everything will be okay. If there's money in the bank account, you spend it. If you've got money in your wallet, you spend it. If there isn't, well, you can't. You don't keep any track of the money that comes in or that you spend. It's just kind of working on your bank balance, or even worse, your credit card balance. If money runs out completely and you still need stuff, well, just go and borrow it. And if there's something that you like and you don't have the money, put it on account. We'll sort it out another day. We're not going to stress out about it. Often, by comparison, the ostrich feels quite happy about themselves. I think, well, I'm not like the caged lion. I'm not like the spitting cobra. I pride myself that money doesn't trouble me. But the difficulty with the ostrich approach, of course, is that you don't have any actually real grip on what's happening. You're not stewarding the money that's in your hand very wisely. You've got an opposite problem to the lion and cobra, and that's just avoidance. You avoid taking responsibility and working with it. Now, what's interesting is that none of these three pictures have got anything to do with how much we've got, but it has everything to do with our relationship with money. It often relates to our background, how we were raised, thoughts and processes, pressure, pain that we've had, all develop our relationship with money. I'd like to look at a story in the Bible of a man who had a bad relationship with money, and his name was Zacchaeus. And the story is found in Luke chapter 19, verse 1 through to 10. And it says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. Now, just in these first two verses, we told this guy's name, we told his job, and we told his financial status. He was a wealthy man, but the most interesting phrase that Luke uses there is that he was a tax collector. So he's not, it wasn't a bad relationship with money for being a wealthy person, but this idea of tax collector is an interesting one. In those days, the Romans had invaded Israel and wanted to collect taxes from an oppressed nation. The way that they did it is that they got certain Jews basically to turn on fellow Jews and become tax collectors for them. And the way that it worked, so Zacchaeus had this job, is that whatever taxes he could extort from people, he had to pay a certain tax per person over to the Roman government, but anything beyond that, he could keep for himself. Tax collectors were hated by their fellow Jews. We are then told that he wanted to see who Jesus was, verse 3, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. So what's interesting here is that we're not told anything else about Zacchaeus' backstory. Maybe the reason he climbed the tree was not only was he short, but maybe he didn't want to be in the middle of a crowd of other Jewish people because he was a little bit nervous. So the short man climbs the tree, and interestingly, he has a desire to see Jesus from a distance. It doesn't say want to talk to him or have an appointment, just wanted to see him. He was a seeker. In other words, he was interested in Jesus, but hadn't decided to become his follower. When Jesus reached that spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he, Zacchaeus, came down at once and welcomed him gladly. Just to pause there, Jesus knew his name without Zacchaeus telling him. And that's a cool thing about Jesus. He knows every single one of us, every detail about our lives, without us mentioning a single thing to him. And he pauses at the tree of this hated man named Zacchaeus, and he says, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to visit you today. And what a day it turned out to be. All the people, verse 7, saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. To paraphrase, Jesus has lost it. We all hate Zacchaeus. If he knew who Zacchaeus really was, he wouldn't have anything to do with him. He's not a spitting cobra. He's not a lion. He's not an ostrich. That guy's a wolf. He's a hyena when it comes to money. But Zacchaeus stood up. Now, this is after he spent some time with Jesus. Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save what was lost." What is really amazing about this story is that we are not told what Jesus and Zacchaeus spoke about. We're not told what they had. Maybe they had a cup of tea together. We're not told what Jesus said to Zacchaeus, but it's easy for us to see the transformation that happened in Zacchaeus afterwards. In fact, we could put it like this, that Zacchaeus had a spiritual reconciliation with God that day, but that he also had a financial reconciliation with God. The spiritual reconciliation outworked itself with a financial reconciliation. And Zacchaeus, unlike that story I told of people saying, "God, don't touch my money, my keys, or my cell phone," what Zacchaeus did was essentially saying, "God, because you've touched my life, everything that I have is under your control, and I'm going to give money away. I'm going to give stuff away. And I'm also going to make wrong things right." So we could say that 2 signs of Zacchaeus' financial reconciliation with God were as follows. Number 1, generosity. And number 2, putting things right. Zacchaeus' financial reconciliation with God resulted in generosity and putting things right. Many, many people experience a spiritual reconciliation with God. They come to Christ. They ask for forgiveness for their sins. And if you haven't done that yet, that's the biggest deal out of everything, much more important than any talk about money. But once we've had a spiritual reconciliation with God, for many, many Christ followers, we need another financial reconciliation. And what I mean by that is a posture or an approach to God that says, "God, I don't just want you to save my soul to heaven one day, but everything that I am and all that I have in this life, I want to be yielded over to you. I don't want to do things my own way. I'm looking for help. I'm looking for guidance. I'm looking for provision. My whole life is submitted to your rule and to your reign." Martin Luther, who was the father of the Protestant Reformation, said this. He said, "There are 3 conversions necessary: the conversion of the heart, the conversion of the mind, and the conversion of the purse, or the conversion of the wallet." You see, when Jesus left Zacchaeus' home that day, Zacchaeus had less money, but he had much more peace. He had a connection with God, and because he had put things right, he had a better connection with fellow man around him. So the second question that I'd like to ask you today, in light of this, is as follows. Have we experienced a financial reconciliation with Christ? To put it more personally, have you experienced a financial reconciliation with Christ? Or have you tried to keep Jesus as far away from your money as possible? Another way of putting this question would be as follows. To what extent is Jesus involved in your personal finances? To what extent is Jesus involved in your money, the money that's in my hands? What's really interesting, straight after the story about Zacchaeus, so Luke 19:10 is where we read up to. In Luke 19:11, with all those same people around, Jesus then tells them a parable related to money. And the story goes like this. He says, "There was once a man who was going to be crowned king, and he called 10 of his servants to him, and to each of them he gave a mina." Now, that's M-I-N-A is how it's spelled. And that Greek currency represented 3 months' wages. So if you could imagine your salary times by 3, your monthly income times by 3, that's what the master gives each of his servants. And he tells the 10 of them, "Go and put the money to work." When he returns, he calls those servants back to him, and he demands an accounting from them on what they've done with his money. The first servant comes back and says, "Master, I took your mina, put it to work. I've earned 10 more. I mean, that's a huge return, 1,000%, if my maths is correct. 1,000% return on the money. And the master says to him, well done, good and faithful servant. The second servant comes and says, I've put your mina to work. I've earned 5 more. Again, a fantastic return, 5 times over. And the master says to him, well done, good and faithful servant. The third servant comes, and he's just got the 1 mina that he was given, and he gives it back. Now, he didn't steal it, and he didn't give it away or spend it or anything like that, but he just returns the 1. And he says to the master, I was very scared of you, so I buried the money in the ground, did nothing with it, and 3 months later, I brought it back. And the master says to him, you could have at very least, even if you're ultra lazy, gone to the bank and put it there and got interest on the money. And that third servant was judged really, really harshly because of that. What stands out to me from the story are these things. Is that first of all, Jesus is making this point, is that he is the king and all money belongs to him. In other words, any money that comes into my world belongs to God in the first place. He owns the whole world, the Bible tells us. Every dollar, every pound, every yen, every rand, all of it belongs to God ultimately. Another way of putting it, somebody said it like this, is that he owns it and he loans it. Whatever money has ever been in my hands or your hands in our lifetime belongs to God. He owns it and he loans it to us, and he gives it out to each of his servants, to us, to spend and invest wisely. The second thing that Jesus is telling us from the story is that one day he will ask us what we did with his money. You see, at the end of that master didn't say, well, that money is yours, do with it as you please. He said, what have you done with my money? And one day, if I read that story correctly, Jesus is going to be asking me what I did with his money that he gave me. A little while ago, my wife Jax asked one of our boys who was in high school to just run into the shop and to get 3 loaves of bread. Here's the money, please buy 3 loaves of bread. He lost track somehow in the short journey between the car and the shop entrance, and when he came out, he had 2 bars of chocolate and no bread. What do you think her reaction was? It's like, oh, fine, that money was yours anyway, it doesn't matter what you bought with it. Or did she say to him, hey, that wasn't your money to make that decision with. I asked for 3 loaves of bread. I didn't ask for 2 chocolate bars. It caused a bit of a laugh because of the brain fade that he had had on the way. But in a much more serious sense, everything that God gives us belongs to him. How we spend it, how we invest it, how we give it, he's going to ask us one day what we did with his money. That actually changes everything. If I view money as mine, well, then I want to hold it tightly. No one tells me what to do with my money. It's mine. I own it. I do what I want. But if my view of money changes to a godly one, and I realize that actually all money comes from him, it all belongs to him in the first place. I am a steward. I'm a manager of God's money. That puts everything in a very, very, very different perspective. So, my third and final question is this. One day, when you stand before God, and he asks you what you did with his money, what will you say? I'll repeat that question. One day, when you stand before God and he asks you what you did with his money, what will you say? It's possible that some of us will say, well, I never knew it was yours. I just treated it as mine. Others might say, well, I did exactly what I wanted to. I just hung on as tightly as I could and made as much of it as I could. Or, a better answer is, look, Master, the money that you gave me, this is how I gave, this is how I saved, this is how I spent, this is how I invested. I did it wisely, knowing that it was ultimately your money. Jesus said in another part of Luke, he said, whoever can be trusted with little, with earthly wealth, can also be trusted with much, with spiritual riches. Money is not actually the big deal. The big deal is that Jesus is Lord of our whole lives, and the way that we handle money shows him how we can handle spiritual riches, which is of eternal value. We can take nothing with us when we die. There's not a single cent that you and I can carry with us beyond the grave, but in this short life that we get, we can acknowledge that God owns it and he loans it, that we will one day answer to him, and that the way that we steward his money is really, really, really important. You see, there's a fourth animal in closing. Not the caged lion, not the cobra, and not the ostrich, but what I would like to call the flying eagle. And I believe that's the picture, the animal picture that we should have regarding finances, is that it needs some energy to get up the thermals. It needs some flapping of the wings, not frantic, but we need to steward our money. It requires work. But as we do it, there's a wind from God that helps lift us, and we start to ride some of his thermals. We know that he's got us through the good times and through the bad. Even when there's thunder and lightning around, we know that we were still designed to fly, not to crawl on the ground. The feelings of frustration, spitting cobra, the anger or avoidance are replaced by actually a deep faith and trust in God that he's looking out for us. Why don't we pray together? Father, as we have spoken about our relationship with money, every one of us in some way needs to adjust our relationship with money. We're so grateful to you that you loved us enough to talk about it in the Bible. You care for us enough to show us what our relationship with money should be like, and more importantly, what our relationship with you should be like. I pray for every person watching this who has never experienced a deep financial reconciliation with you, that today would be that day where they say to you, God, I'm all in. My money, my possessions, my time, my friends, everything belongs to you. Please help me. In Jesus' name, amen.